From the southeastern corner of western North Carolina, this is Folklore. I'm your host, James Hernishin. In the hours before and after I recorded what you're about to hear, mass shootings took place in at least 3 cities around the country. As usual, the weapons involved received a fair bit of attention. The man who killed 5 people in Philadelphia, for example, used an assault rifle, as is the case in so many mass murders in the United States. And it's entirely appropriate that we recognize, yet again, that it really doesn't make sense for private citizens to keep and bear arms that are designed not for self-protection, but to kill as many other human beings in a short amount of time as possible. But the truth is, even if we were to ban assault rifles, that would do nothing to address a much bigger problem. Individual shootings, usually with a handgun. Far more people, hundreds of times more, often women, die this way than in mass shootings. It happened earlier this year in Polk County, and it deserves at least as much attention. Talia Petoia, who had just turned 27, was shot and killed, reportedly by her boyfriend, 21-year-old Tyler Lauder, on March 10th in Mill Spring. Within a few days, the Polk County Sheriff's Office announced that the killing was accidental, an unintentional discharge while handling a gun. 3 months later, following a grand jury hearing, the district attorney indicted Talia's boyfriend on a charge of involuntary manslaughter. His trial, assuming he doesn't plead guilty, is scheduled for August 15th. This kind of thing does happen, of course. Even otherwise responsible gun owners can accidentally fire their weapons while loading, unloading, or cleaning them. So why did dozens of people in Polk County and neighboring communities collectively put up about $20,000 to help Talia's family hire a lawyer and a private investigator to second-guess the findings of the sheriff's office, the grand jury, and the DA? I don't want to prejudge the case, but 3 things convinced me that this story was worth a closer look. First, there's the fact that so many people are willing to support a GoFundMe campaign that claims something has gone very wrong with the justice system in our county. Second, violence against women is a serious threat to society just about everywhere. Talia isn't the only young woman in Polk County to be abused by a boyfriend recently. And if a sizable portion of our population, justifiably or not, doesn't trust the police and the justice system to protect them, then we have a problem. Finally, the challenge of balancing the current prevailing interpretation of the Second Amendment with the right to live in a safe world just never seems to go away. I reached out to someone familiar with the folks behind the Justice for Talia campaign, and she put me in touch with a woman who had been a friend of Talia since they were little girls. Emily Shanahan and I talked at Harmon Field on July 3rd. Emily Shanahan, welcome to Folklore.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, this is going to be a little bit of a different kind of episode, and I understand you'd kind of like to read your own introduction to set up what you're going to say.
Yeah, so just to start, unless I state otherwise, everything I'm going to say is my own opinion, and I don't intend any malice against Tyler Lauder or his family or anyone else. It's not my place to decree whether or not Tyler Lauder is a good person, and I don't like the language of this person is a monster. I don't want to do that. Everybody has their good qualities, and I would never want to tell Tyler's family how to feel, but the law needs to apply to Tyler the same way as to everybody else. I want to talk about what happened to Talia Petoia and ask questions about the integrity of the investigation into her death. I also don't claim to know what happened the night she was shot and died. I don't. But I do know that she did die, and I have questions about the way that's being investigated. I want to know what happened to her. I was a family friend of Talia's, and I'm very close to this case. But over and over again, I've heard from people who did not know Talia that they also take issue with this case. The question of justice in our community should draw us all in and make us all pay attention.
Thanks for that. I think that really sets this episode up really well. But first, let's talk about your role in this effort to re-examine how things are going with Talia's investigation. Tell me about yourself and why you're involved.
Right. Okay. So I am one of multiple people who are behind the Justice for Talia movement. I was a close friend of Talia's in childhood. We were raised together in a cooperative homeschool group from the time when we were basically toddlers until right on the cusp of high school. So I think Talia was probably about 3 when I met her. I would have been maybe 4. We did grow apart as we got older, but because of the way we were raised, which was so immersive, she's more like family to me than a friend, I would say. And her loss has been really devastating.
How did the group get together?
I think the moment was right after Talia's memorial service. So Talia was shot and killed on March 10th. On March 18th, there was a memorial service for her. And afterwards, I and some of Talia's other childhood friends gathered for, it was supposed to be a meal, but nobody really ate. And we talked about what we knew about the case so far. And we were just horrified. And we kept in touch and we kept talking about it. And we decided to try to share information more broadly as much as possible and to take on as much of that labor as we could so that it wouldn't fall on her family. Because they have enough to be worrying about right now.
What specifically about the context of how the court case was going, how the charges were laid, what was the most troubling part of the whole thing for you?
Honestly, it's not a question that has one answer. One of the things that was really troubling to us since early on was the fact that Tyler was charged with involuntary manslaughter for shooting someone. So he shot her through the heart and she died. In North Carolina, involuntary manslaughter is the unintentional killing of a human being by an unlawful act not amounting to a felony, or by an act done not in a criminally negligent way, right? So that would mean that it was truly an accident that couldn't really be foreseen, and you weren't breaking the law in a dangerous way prior to that. And he shot someone. So one would think logically, at the very least, he pointed a loaded gun at someone. I find it strange that within days of Talia's death, the police could be certain that he had not done anything criminally negligent, that he hadn't committed any other serious crimes, and that this was really and truly an accident. Tyler, was charged before the autopsy was completed. He was only required to post, $20,000 bail, and he was out within hours, did not spend one night in jail.
Okay, well, let's look at it from the sheriff's point of view here. If you're going to charge somebody with intentional homicide, first or second degree, or manslaughter, you've got to have evidence that it was intentional. So what they're saying is, we think this was a case of cleaning a gun and it went off unintentionally, right?
I think what they're saying is unloading it now. Unloading a gun and it went off unintentionally. But even so, he would have had to have been pointing it at Talia. Is that criminal negligence? I would think that there's a case for it at the very least, although I'm not a lawyer. There's also, the family maintains there's quite a lot of evidence that Tyler was abusing Talia.
Okay, well, we want to be careful here. We don't have documentation. We don't have a list of criminal charges.
We don't have a list of criminal charges. That is true. I am not going to say that I know for sure what is in Tyler Lauder's heart. I'm not going to say that I know for sure what was done, but we have heard from other people about this. A confirmed source who knows the situation very well came forward and said that she knew very clearly of incidents of past domestic violence that Tyler committed against a different partner. We have people who have come forward and said, Tyler threatened me. Multiple people have come forward and said that.
Okay, so just to be clear, this is all unconfirmed in a sense that we don't have direct knowledge of it.
We do not, no.
Okay.
I have never personally been threatened by Tyler Lauder.
Right. So what you're saying is you're aware of enough allegations out there that should have at least raised the flags in the sheriff's office that, hey, maybe the chances that just he happened to accidentally shoot her in the heart is a bit of a stretch.
Right. So I'm not trying to say I know exactly what happened, not by any stretch of the imagination. I am saying that there are enough red flags that I think called for more scrutiny here than the case received.
Now, the sheriff would say, well, we did 3 months of investigation. I mean, yes, they did decide it was involuntary manslaughter right off the bat, but then they did 3 months before they actually took it to a grand jury, right?
They did wait 3 months before they took it to a grand jury. But how much investigation did they actually do? We have questions about the number of people who were interviewed or not interviewed. As far as we know, none of Tyler Lauder's previous partners have been contacted in any way to provide evidence about their experiences with him to sort of establish a pattern, potentially, of abusive or coercive relationship dynamics. And we feel like all of that should have been background to the case.
All right. Now, I want to point out that the sheriff's office has made it clear they're not going to say anything about this. And they have a rather lengthy Facebook post, which I'm going to copy and put a link to in the show notes so everybody can read that.
Yes.
But they're basically saying, or Sheriff Wright is saying, a lot of allegations have been thrown around and they just want to clear the air. Although they don't actually say what they're clearing.
No, and we found some of the wording to be actually more concerning than I think they may have intended. So, for instance, one of the things that's been said to us multiple times that we don't have personal knowledge of, but multiple people have come to us and said, Tyler Lauder has relatives in the Polk County Sheriff's Office, right? I don't have personal knowledge of this. I don't know that it's true. But in their press release, they did respond to that claim directly and say, quote, unfortunately, in a small jurisdiction, it is almost impossible to avoid any familiar relationships coming up in some fashion in major investigations. And they do say that none of the investigators are directly related to Tyler. They go that far. But I think that if he does have connections in the department, there's an inherent conflict of interest because maybe you're working for someone who's related to him. Maybe you're friends with someone who's related to him. It just seems like a perfect moment to say, all right, this is getting a little bit convoluted. Let's call in the State Bureau of Investigation and make sure that there's no even appearance of impropriety.
Well, the appearance of impropriety, the appearance of justice being done is extremely important.
I believe so.
And I got to say, this is the part that really got me going because you can't call the SBI, the State Bureau of Investigation, every time there's something serious going on because they just don't have the resources to respond. But Polk County is a small county that doesn't have too many homicides to deal with on a regular basis. We're very fortunate. We actually don't have a lot of violent crime, I think. We have a fair bit of drug-related activity that the police have to spend a ridiculous amount of time on. But homicides, I've looked at the data, and we're pretty good, relatively speaking. So am I correct in saying that it probably wouldn't be much, it wouldn't be going beyond the realm of reasonable request to go to the SBI when you do have a homicide that is problematic from a relationship point of view?
I would think that that would be a reasonable thing to do. I know of a similar case in Hendersonville where someone connected to the sheriff's office was killed. They called in the State Bureau. So it does happen. And that is what the family has requested from the very beginning. Talia's mother, Julie, always wanted the State Bureau brought in. And in the beginning, the sheriff's office told her that they had no issue with that, but then they just never followed through.
Well, again, we don't really know what motivated the sheriff's office to decide to keep it all in the county.
No, but the fact remains that they didn't follow through.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about what the group, what's it called again?
Justice for Talia Petoia.
Has accomplished. As I mentioned in my introduction, is it now in excess of $20,000 you've raised?
Close. It's, okay. I think, 19,500 close, which isn't directly run by us. Talia's aunt, Allison, runs that page. But we do work closely with Allison to try to, send people her way.
And do you know how many individual donations?
I don't know.
No. Well, we can go and look at the webpage, I guess.
I'm sure.
And see. Well, that sounds like an awful lot of money for any GoFundMe campaign in a small county like ours.
Mm-hmm.
What will that money be used for?
Well, for a few things. The family needed the money to hire lawyers. They also wanted to look into bringing in private investigators because they had some concerns about the way the investigation was going. And if there's any money left over at the end of that, they would like to make a donation to the Polk County Community Foundation in Talia's name. I don't think we've gotten to that point yet. I think that we're still trying to cover legal expenses and so on.
Sure, first things first.
Yes.
And the next thing on the agenda, I guess, would be there is a court date of August 15th.
Well, we'll see. There was supposed to be a court date of June 28th, and then there abruptly wasn't. But as of right now, it is scheduled for August 15th.
Is that the beginning of the trial?
Honestly, that I am not sure of. Things keep shifting rapidly. So Tyler was supposed to be arraigned on April 12th. On April 12th, he was granted a continuance, and that was supposed to be until June 28th. And then suddenly on June 17th, I think we found out that he had already been indicted on the 12th or the 15th of June by a grand jury. There was no warning for this. We weren't told that the court date was coming up. You can't sit in on them anyway, but still, we would have liked to know.
Well, grand juries do kind of operate in secret. I mean, it's not a public event.
No, but then abruptly, there was no June 28th anymore.
Okay.
And so that date just went away. So now I'm not sure what's happening on August 15th, but that is supposed to be the next court date.
And I know that continuances are not unusual.
No.
Especially when you've got a limited number of lawyers available and they're juggling different cases, and police officers are often not available. And so to get all your ducks in a row, sometimes you have to keep putting these things off. I just want to caution that a continuance by itself is not a sign of anything problematic.
Oh, a continuance in and of itself is not a problem. It's more the fact that things change without warning, i.e., June 28th went away with no explanation.
What would you? I mean, you're not a lawyer, and
No.
You're not privy to all the details of the case. But what are you hoping that maybe a private investigator or lawyers could accomplish at this point?
So there are a few things, and bear in mind, I am not privy to Julie Daniels' meetings with the lawyers. I talk to her, but I don't attend those meetings. It would be nice if they could find evidence, if there is any, of abuse or control in Talia's relationship with Tyler, right? That would be key. If only just to sort of show that the story here is bigger than a one-time incident. That was just a tragic accident that could not have been foreseen. I don't want to speak to anything too touchy to the case because I don't want to screw anything up for the family. So I think I'm going to leave it there.
Okay. Well, let's look at the bigger picture, though. One of the things that I always think is a little problematic about American culture right now is that almost anybody can get their hands on a gun. And it's very hard to take a gun away from somebody. Has this tragic event changed your thinking? I mean, did you give much thought to guns and gun control and gun availability before?
I am not a gun owner. I'm not also ardently opposed to guns, but one of the things that did come to my attention during this case is that North Carolina doesn't have a red flag law, which some states do. Basically, the idea is that if someone is a threat to themselves or others, a judge can order their weapons taken away or temporarily block them from purchasing a weapon. Which seems like a very sensible course of action to me, right? If someone is making threats, etc., that would be a reasonable step to take, especially since it's temporary. And, you theoretically, if nothing bad happens, you can have your weapons back at some point. Each state does it slightly differently. Sometimes it's only the police who can raise a flag. Sometimes it's a family member. I think that sounds very useful. On the other hand, would that have saved Talia? Probably not. I don't think that the law enforcement had any reason in their point of view to raise a red flag.
So, again, we can't turn back time, obviously. No. But given our suspicions and given what actually happened, the ability to put a little bit of control on someone's Second Amendment rights, you're saying it would make sense?
I think so. I would say I am not a constitutional lawyer. Let me start there. Okay. I am not a constitutional lawyer. I do think, though, that particularly when we're talking about violence against women, where there's frequently a pattern of escalation, that is something to be very concerned about.
Have you thought about using any of this experience organizing in response to Talia's death to, I don't know, petition our congressman, for instance, about this?
I think that's a little further down the road for us. I mean, Talia died 3 months ago. It's still really fresh. This case is still happening. I don't think that we have the space, the attention to turn to something that big yet.
Okay.
I think step one right now is just trying to advocate for her family and make sure that they're not getting run over throughout this process.
I mean, it is not an easy subject.
No.
The Second Amendment gives everyone the right to keep and bear arms. And how to balance that with our responsibility to ensure that innocent people aren't killed in the heat of the moment, it's one of the biggest questions in American politics today.
Yes.
And so this story, one of the reasons we're doing this podcast episode is because it doesn't take much for a big national issue to find, a local manifestation of the problems that are involved. Is there anything else that comes to mind beyond guns?
So one of the major parts of the case that I think has relevance for other cases and, is relevant nationally is the question of a dying declaration. One of the reasons that Tyler supposedly was deemed to have killed Talia by accident is that, according to EMTs, while en route to the hospital after she was shot, Talia said that it wasn't Tyler's fault and that it was an accident. So the DA, Tyler's family, and the sheriff have been referring to this as a dying declaration, which is a kind of hearsay. And usually hearsay isn't admissible in court. We do sometimes make exceptions for dying declarations because the reasoning goes that dying people have less reason to lie, right? However, in order for something to be a dying declaration, it needs to meet 3 criteria. Number 1 is the speaker is unavailable. They don't have to actually die, but if you can't cross-examine them, then that makes them unavailable, right?
Right.
Number 2 is they need to speak about the cause or circumstances of their own death. They can't talk about other things and have that get used. It has to be their own death. Number 3 is they have to know that they were dying. And we have no idea if Talia knew that she was dying. There are objections to dying declarations. They've been criticized because people on the point of death might not be fully in their right mind. Talia was actively bleeding out. She was shot, I believe, around 10 p.m. She was dead at 11:09. So she may not have had a good understanding of what was happening to her.
Still, I can understand why the police would think this is a relatively important
I can see
piece
that
of
too.
the puzzle.
I absolutely can see how it would be an important piece of the puzzle. But you also have to understand that particularly women who have been abused, or people in general who've been abused, tend to blame themselves and want to protect the person who hurt them. And that is not something that goes away just because you're dying. Honestly, knowing Talia, I'm sure she wanted to protect Tyler. I'm sure that she wouldn't want him to get in trouble because for better or for worse, she was fiercely protective and loyal.
That's a whole dimension of the story I hadn't really thought about. And it would be very difficult to deal with it. I'm glad I'm not a lawyer, these sort of things. But I think for me, the message is that, this is complicated.
It is. It's very complicated.
And it almost is like a little too complicated for most people to get their heads around. Do you have, clearly you don't have a lot of confidence in Polk County itself to deal with this because you would like to see the SBI involved. But that's not to saying you don't have any confidence in the sheriff's department.
No, and I don't want to demean anyone. I don't want to speak badly. I have been progressively more and more disheartened over the course of the last few months. And I don't want to feel that way. I would like to have confidence in the way that this is being handled. And I think that I would feel much better if I knew that the sheriff's office felt like, in order to regain some degree of public confidence, they're going to turn this over. I think that would be like a really commendable thing to do. It is not my place to decide this person is a good person, this person is a bad person. I just want to know that the process is working the way that it should.
And I think the perception is so important here because whether or not the decision not to involve the SBI was the right one, the simple popularity of the GoFundMe campaign indicates there's a lot of people who are unhappy
Yes.
with it. And I first thought, well, we just don't have that many homicides, so maybe people are just reacting a little emotionally. But again, when we look at all the details, it's just there's not a simple path forward.
Yes. I mean, it is a complicated case, assuming that Talia actually did make that statement, which I was not in the ambulance. I did not hear it. That would be complicated. But domestic abuse cases are often complicated, and the justice system needs to figure out how to deal with that. They just do.
And you're not 100% certain that they have the resources to do it?
I frankly don't know. I just don't know. And again, I did not personally witness any abuse. I don't want to overstate the case here, but the family contends that there was. And we have had other people come forward and say that they witnessed behavior that they deemed to be unsafe, scary, whatever. So we should explore that as far as it will go to determine if it's true. And I don't think that that's happening right now.
All right. So again, given we really don't know how this is going to turn out, what would be an optimal but realistic outcome for you?
Okay. If this goes to a trial, we want to know that all of the evidence was presented before a jury. We want to know that all of it was reviewed and understood by the people whose job that is. We also want to see Talia's family treated with respect by the investigators and the DA. I don't think that they have been treated with respect thus far. And I'm sorry to see that because they're already going through something that is unimaginably tragic. So we would like for that to change. It would be nice, and this is getting a little more pie in the sky. It would be nice if there were changes to the way the PCSO handles all domestic abuse cases, because we've actually had multiple people who didn't know Talia reach out to us and say, I was abused in Polk County. Police didn't take me seriously. And that's really terrifying to hear. I mean, it's terrifying. It's also sad. You never want to hear that. We want equal protection under the law. And this is a short-term goal. This is a really short-term goal. But we want to know that in the meantime, Tyler Lauder does not have access to guns. I actually received an email from the district attorney earlier today admitting that he doesn't know whether Tyler has access to guns. And considering he recently, whether accidentally or not, killed someone with a gun and then spent time on suicide watch due to suicidal threats, I think that it would be irresponsible to allow him to potentially hurt himself or someone else in the meantime. Well,
I'm a little surprised because I would think that the attorney would know very well whether or not he has access to guns, or at least whether the judge has allowed Tyler to have access to guns.
I would think that in a case where the district attorney was doing his due diligence, he would know that.
Well, that's a kind of a dark place to stop, but the story's not over.
No.
And I think everybody will be paying close attention in August to see what develops in court. So thanks so much for spending some time and talking about this very difficult subject. This is not something I ever expected to do a podcast about, and hopefully won't ever do it again, but we will see what happens.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope that I've done the topic justice. I know very well that, I am only one person, and this is a really big issue that affects a lot of people. So I hope that I've done well enough for the other people who aren't here today.
Thank you. And that's it for this episode. Next time, I promise something a lot less controversial and a lot more uplifting. I talked to the founder of a national nonprofit organization that recently relocated to Saluda. He runs something called Preserving a Picturesque America, and I think you're really going to enjoy the story he has to tell. Until then, you can reach me at jamesh@folklore.com with your suggestions for guests, story ideas, or any feedback you might have. Thanks for listening.